which I attended as a lecturer was DOM API. So you'll need this knowledge on DOM API to get acquainted with DOM events. Did everybody who is here now saw the DOM API lecture? Yep, fine. So today we're going to talk about what event basically is. We'll talk about event handlers in JavaScript. I'll show you the two ways of defining like event handlers. Yeah, and what is the difference between those methods. So basically, it's not so much information on it. So we'll explore more live examples like we did on the previous lecture. Okay, can I continue? Okay, let's go ahead. Let me, oh no, I'll start with explaining what event is. So basically event in JavaScript is some action that a user or a browser fires. So example of event may be button click, focus an element. It could be also an page load. For example, it's an element of life cycle of the page, how browser handle is. So loading of the page is also an event. Clicking mouse is also an event. Removing is also an event. And basically, it's what event is. It's some action. We have like a DOM structure. It's our page. And event is anything which can be what can be considered as communication with the page. Is it clear to you? Yep, fine. And before we start coding, before we start exploring live examples like we did on the past lecture, we need to know what event handler is. And I'm glad I was the one who talked about the function in JavaScript. I was talking about the function in two parts. There was part one lecture and part two. And basically, event handler, it takes together the JavaScript function and DOM events. So two event handlers is some function that respond to JavaScript event and fires some function. For example, you want to, for example, to load the data on button click. You have an event which is click, and you have a function which loads the data you need. And you using event handlers, you take it all together, this event on click and this function load data, and basically this is what event handler does. Now let me share my screen, or we'll go ahead to some real world examples. Do you see my screen, guys? Fine. So, like in the past lecture, we go ahead, type google.com, and we'll use the existing DOM to define event and see how they work. Okay, we don't need to create like our own dummy like examples. I mean, simple blocks diff when we already have some real life. It's a bit more complicated, but it's what you're gonna work with. So get used to it. Okay, we'll start with the material of the last lecture. We'll assign an ID to this Google image, not to image, but to div containing it. I want to use this full width div block. Yeah, we're starting editing our HTML. Is it clear to you guys? Do you see the code? Fine. So we'll take an event called mouse over. An event called. Yeah, so someone has the mic turned on. Do you want to ask something? Yeah, okay. So I'll explain you the first example of defining an event handlers, and we have an event called mouse over. To define it like in attribute like mode, like we do, we have to use on prefix. For example, if the event is click, we use on click. If the event is focus, we use on focus. If the event is load, we use on load. So every time you define event handler as an attribute of your block, you always use on prefix. In our case, it will be on mouse over. Mouse over is an event, is an action when I'm just moving my mouse and it crosses a selected element. So here is what it looks like. Name of the event equal sign, and inside of these symbols we type function name. And when you mouse over this block, the function will fire. The problem is we don't have a function yet, so we have to define it. To be simple, I define a function, simple function. It will just console log something. I will call it function greeting. Sorry, function greeting. So here is where you need this knowledge about functions, and it will just console log hello. Yeah, so we have function defined, and now we have to change our div. Yeah. And here it is. We have this element selected, and we should see hello every time I mouse over this div. And here it is. So you see we're crossing the border of this div element, and hello logs increasing. Here is the number 11, 12. It continues increases while I'll cross my cursor over it. So if I just moving cursor here, just crossing input or somewhere in the footer, Yeah, you won't see, but when I cross this element, it will start to increase. So it means our event handler works. Guys, do you have any questions? Oh, okay. I'm glad it's clear to you. So it's the first version of defining an event listener. It's called event handler. So event listener is basically a different thing, but both event handlers and event listeners are used to solve the same problem. They connect event type and function to listen, to operate some events and fire some functions. Yeah. Again, if you have some questions, please ask. We'll refresh our page to get rid of this on mouse over attribute, and we'll basically do the same. I think we've lost our greeting function. Yeah, we'll define this function again. Oh, no, sorry. We'll start from the opposite. We choosing the same div, is the div containing Google logo, and we assigning to it an ID to later get it in the console using DOM API. So we added this, we assign it an ID. I'll call it logo container. Copy it. Yeah, and we'll refresh our knowledge on DOM API a bit. First of all, we'll ensure it's accessible. Document gets element by ID. Yeah, it's accessible. And now we assign a new variable, logo container equals document get element by ID, logo. Yeah, so we're good. And now you basically do the same stuff, but you don't assign an attribute on mouse over here. You're doing it in your JavaScript block. It's the place, in our case, it's a console. So we're selecting our logo container. We're selecting mouse over event. We assigning some function. It would be greeting. We should create. So we do the same. We create a function greeting. Yeah. And now we're selecting our logo container. Mouse over event equals greeting. Yeah, so here we are. So these are two ways of defining an event handler. Is it clear to you guys? Yep, fine. And you have the second type of managing, of how you manage you work with events, is add event listener. So basically, it's event listener is the same stuff as event handler. It's just different in way you define it. To add an event listener, you should have some elements selected. In our case, let us refresh the page. Yeah. And we'll change the element we're working with. We'll work with this div. It's not full width, it's different one. We call it logo, sign in ID. It's logo equals document. So here we are. So we have our logo element and our function greeting. Now we need to connect them. And we're using logo dot add event listener. And add event listener is a function which accepts two parameters. The first parameter is the type of event. You use the actual name of the event. So it's mouse over. You don't use on prefix. It's because the event name is mouse over. And the second parameter is a function which will fire on the event of this type. It's greeting. Yeah, so here it is. This stuff won't work because we're using different block, but here it works fine. Yeah, and you can do almost everything inside of your function. Console log is just the most simple one. Let's define another function called change background. It will change the background. It would change the styling of our div. So we define a new function. Change background. Would use our variable logo. It's the div. Logo dot style dot background equals, which color do we choose? I choose yellow. So we have the function change background. Yeah, and we define a new event listener, logo event listener on mouse over, and we change the function. We change it to change background. Now, so it fires an event on mouse over, but style remains the same. So once you mouse over your element, the background is yellow. Any suggestion, guys, how you revert it back? So how can I make Google look the same it originally looked? Yeah, that's right. We should use another. We should define another function which would set background to white, and we should add new event listener, which would handle it. So we define a new function called revert background logo dot style dot background equals white. Yeah, and we're adding a new event listener. We might add it like this on mouse leaf. Now we will discuss the difference between those methods. Basically, it's fine to do. It would work if you define on mouse over event in one way and on mouse leaf in another way. But we'll discuss in which case what type is better for you. Yeah, we'll discuss it a bit later. Mouse leaf equals. So here it is. You have event listener mouse over. It changes background to yellow, and when your pointer, when your cursor leaves this element, the background is reverted back to white. Guys, is it clear to you? Yeah, fine. And this is how you build your communication with your page. You have a number of events. There is a really big list of them. It's all the basic events which happen when you interact with your page, and you can create your own function to create basically anything you like. Here is the list of these events, DOM events. You see it's really big. Change, click, copy, cut, drag. I'll post this to the chat. Yes, take a look after the lecture. We're using just two of them, mouse over and mouse leaf. So yeah, basically that's it. And what's the difference between an event handler, the way we tried first, and an event listener? Basically, the element you selected, like logo, can have only one event handler, or like only one event handler per event type. So you can have only one event handler for click action, only one event handler for on mouse over action, on mouse leave action, etc. So if you try, here we have on mouse leave event handler revert background, and we assign we define a new function. Function like red background. Could also change the background of our element. Logo, that style background. Sorry. Okay, I should use this one. equals red. And you have logo that's on sleeve or no? Yeah, so basically the second on mouse sleeve event handler overrides the previous one. And the same if you add them like this. If you have number of on mouse sleeve, only the last one will work. So for one like for event of selected type, you can have only one event handler. Is it clear to you? Yep, fine. And guess what's the difference between event handlers and at event listeners type, like between event handlers and event listeners? What is the difference between those methods of handling events in JavaScript? Do you have some ideas what is the difference? Yep, that's correct. You can have multiple event listener for the same event when you have an event listener. For example, right now we have 2 event listener for mouse over event. Yeah, it's change background event, which changes our background to yellow. This, and it's console log hello. It's our greeting function, and both of them work. So you see the number here changes. So for example, we have 5 logs of hello. We can clear console. So both of them work. You can change background to yellow and log hello at the same time. So you decide on which goal do you have. On which goal do you have? You decide which type of handling events do you choose, event handler or event listener. Is it clear to you guys? Yeah, okay. Any questions? Guys, any questions? Oh, I see one. It's about if you use add event listener, they do not overwrite each other. They work together. So the difference if you choose event handler type of handling events, yeah, they override. Event handler only fires the last function you defined. One function per event type. It's important So you can define one function for click and one function for mouse over using event handlers. But if you try to define two functions for click event using event handlers, only the last one defined will work. Did I answer your question?
Sorry, I'll try to go with a mic. So
yeah.
if I mention the, for example, on click event handler in HTML as an attribute, and then I will add event handler in JavaScript as a file, as a script, which one will actually work?
Actually, I don't know the answer because I didn't try this in my experience. Let's try. Let's try to define. Yeah, we still have our logo. We have logo on mouse over equals 3. I think it would be the last defined. So if we define first one in a console and then we define it as an attribute, it would be the attribute. So I will create the second function, which would say bye-bye. Yep. And we find our logo element, edit its HTML. Like this, and we check our console. Oh. Yeah, let's refresh the page because we had event handlers and event listener in of our previous examples. Yeah, that's fine. Hello and by functions. Now we edit our DOM. We are adding an ID and on mouse over event handler. And here we will have hello function. So what just happened? For example, for some reason, it didn't save. ID logo on mouse over equals hello. Yep. Yeah, so here it is. Sorry, I'll check the messages. Yeah, thank you. Right now it's hello, and here we're using logo equals documents by ID logo. Logo on mouse over equals by. Here our console, and here only by console log happen. So it's because you define it as a second one. So it doesn't mean the way you defined your event handler in JavaScript or in HTML like an attribute. What matters is the sequence. If you define it the last, only the last will work. And add event listener. So let's have multiple event listeners. Again, we refresh our page to get rid of existing event handlers and event listeners, and doing the same. Yeah. ID logo. We are. And let's have the same function, hello and bye. Function. In this example, I will not define a new variable logo. I will just do like this. Event listener. Also remember to get rid of the on prefix. Hello. Yeah, it works fine. And we're using the same code. We are getting our logo and adding event listener on mouse over, but using by function. Right now, both of these functions should work. So we see hello and bye at the same time. The last function doesn't override the previous function. So here we are. If you have to assign multiple, if you need to fire multiple function on the event of one type, you're using event listener. If it's fine to have only one function per type, you're using event handler. So which one are you most comfortable with? Is it clear, guys? Yes, and I want to take your attention on these details. So when you define event handler here, it's important to remember about the on prefix. It's the first detail. Like starting with on. The second details, the second detail, you write the name of function name, like this. So basically you run the function. It's the code running the function. When you assigning some event via JavaScript, mouse over, yeah, you type just the name of the function without these signs. And the same with event listeners. Is it clear? So I saw some question. How can we check if the certain event was triggered? So we had event like console log. We check the console. If we have the log, it means that the function was triggered. That's it. How to remove event? You have event listener. To remove event, there is a type called a function. Let us logo and we remove event listener if I'm not missing something. Let me check. I'm not quite sure. So basically, to remove event listener, you just repeat the same. The parameters of the function is the same. First is the event's name. Second is the function, but it's just a different name, like you do. And event listener, the same way you do in remove event listener. How to remove all listeners from one element. It's a good question. And I'll do the same. I'll do every time I don't know something. Here we go. It's another useful resource called Stack Overflow. So it's tricky. There is no like special method for removing all event listener. We have a bunch of answers here. Yeah, personally, I didn't had this specific task during like commercial development, like remove existing event. Ilya, I'm not sure if you can do it. If you can list all edit event listeners. You can just explore the code by the keywords add event listeners and check them like to do it in a programmatical way. Personally, I don't know the answer how to do it. Any more questions, guys? If you don't have any more questions, feel free to research this topic on your own using the useful resources I mentioned earlier. Yeah, and that's it. Thank you for attending. Yeah, thank you for good question, guys. Take care.